Hi there everyone, and welcome back to my podcast Father Ed Talks. This is episode 3. Some of you have suggested that I should film myself recording the podcast so there's something for you to watch as well as to listen. So welcome to my very bland and boring office. Perhaps I should invest in some different coloured lights, I don't know, either side. Maybe one day. So welcome to the Thoroughly Imperfect podcast. I'm so happy to welcome you. If this is your first time, my name is Edward, and I am a priest. I am a vicar in Wales in the United Kingdom, and I'm so happy to welcome you to episode 3. Why am I still a Christian? Part 2. Part 1 is an earlier podcast, episode 2, so if you haven't heard that, you're so welcome to go and listen to that one as well. But this part 2, why am I still a Christian in a world of reason and science? So, if you haven't got a cup of coffee, why not go and grab one? I've got mine here and I've got my notes, so I'm ready. Today I'm going to answer that question immediately, straight away, and then go on to explain exactly what I mean and why I've said it. So, in answer to that question, why am I still a Christian when there's so much science and reason? Doesn't science and reason all explain that away? Well, for me, through my own experiences, I believe that in all of us, we have a God-shaped hole in our hearts and minds. What I mean by that is, I think that through my experiences, I know that I have a fundamental, innate desire to know God, to love God, and to be loved by God, to be in relationship. And I don't believe that's unique to me or to other religious people. I think what it means to be human is to have that fundamental desire to know and love that source of our creation. So wow, I mean, what does all of that mean? So I think, firstly, that's my answer, but I need to take us back and go through it. One of the things that is probably one of the greatest privileges that clergy have is the work that we are able to do in school. Children have the most incredible, fantastic way of answering really sharp and poignant questions, really clever questions, and it's just done in such a way. So 2 funny examples. One, I remember during one assembly, one of the children said, "Oh, Father Edward, are you a real God?" And I just had to laugh because, I mean, to my mind, that's just hilarious. I'm just a human being. I'm not God. So I had to say, no. I believe in God. I don't think that I am a God. But yeah. And then another one, a little boy, he said to me, "Father Edward, do you really believe in God?" And I said, "Well, yes, I do." And then his reply, which was amazing, he said, "Well, I believe in what I can see and touch." I think that little boy, he can't have been older than 10. But what he was articulating was something that I think is generally the mindset of a lot of people. Some of you might remember on the side of some of the buses in London a few years ago, there was that sign that read, "There's probably no God, so stop worrying and enjoy your life." All of this is the kind of rhetoric of the new atheists. So people like Christopher Hitchens, people like Richard Dawkins, and of course the YouTube sensation Cosmic Skeptic. So yeah, a quick Google search on YouTube, and you can find out everything that you would need to know about these different characters, these people. There are many others, of course, but they're like largely the new atheists who are very influential on a lot of especially young people's mindsets today. And we saw that in the little boy who was saying, "Well, you believe in God, but I believe in what I can see and touch." So this is why he and so many so many people think this way. So the new atheists will always begin by saying, okay, we're going to start with this definition of God. God is, historically, considered to be a supernatural being, an almighty being that has certain attributes like being all-loving, all-knowing, all-powerful, unchanging. They'll use these kinds of words. And they'll then say, well, if such a being exists, then we need to determine that truth by scientific method. So we need to use empirical research, sensing, perceiving, touching, smelling, to determine whether or not that being that people call God exists. And because there's no evidence of this being floating around the universe, well, then our natural conclusion must be that God does not exist. That's pretty much it, and that's a very convincing argument because it's quite logical, isn't it? So, and you can see how that is very much the mindset of many, many people today. Okay, so I was just hoping to draw out two things from that argument, which are problematic from my perspective. So, the first is to say that these ideas that these people are putting forward are actually nothing new, and are actually quite impoverished versions of some other thinkers from the 19th and 20th century, and I'm going to go on to just briefly touch on them in a second. The second thing to say is that, unfortunately, the logic falls down when we disagree over the definition of God, and secondly, the use of the word existence. So from a Christian perspective, we think of God differently. We wouldn't describe God in the way that Richard Dawkins and many others have described. And we would also be very careful about that word existence. So I will explain what that means, but first I need to touch on some of the earlier thinkers that the new atheists are borrowing ideas. For me, these thinkers from the 19th and 20th century are far more convincing. They're real heavyweight atheists because they take very seriously what I mentioned at the very beginning of my video when I said that I believe that we have a God-shaped hole in our hearts and minds. We have a genuine desire to know and love God and to be loved and in this loving relationship with our Creator. These philosophers, the existentialist philosophers, took this question very, very seriously. They knew about our need for God. They didn't believe in God, but they knew that that void, once God is gone, needed to be replaced with something. Okay, so just stick with me, because I hope this will be very interesting. If you want a full detailed look into each of these thinkers, I'm going to post a video in the description below of someone called Robert Barron, who is going to just basically go through them. It's a decent 45-minute video, but it's well worth watching because he explains how influential these distant historical characters have been on our current mindset. It's truly amazing. The first person I'd like to talk about just very briefly is someone called Ludwig Feuerbach. Feuerbach is kind of the real architect of all of this modern thinking. And he died in 1872. And he believed that religion, the invention of religion, the invention of God, it was just something that we humans have just imagined because we need some kind of escape from our fears and anxieties, and we've just made it up to feel better about ourselves. I hope I'm not doing an injustice to these thinkers because they are, as I say, they're very serious. And if you want a good introduction, check out the video in the description below. And many of these thinkers learned from each other. So the second guy is, I just wanted to focus on, was Karl Marx. Many of us will know him as like the architect of communism and eventually the revolution in Russia in the early 20th century. So he went further. He said that actually religion is just the opiate of the masses. It's this kind of drug that we take to dull our senses, to make us feel better about our economic situation. So for Karl Marx, which was very much coming out of his life experience and his experience of things going on, he believed that an imbalanced economic structure is the fundamental oppressor of humanity. And what he wants to do was to highlight these economic differences. Actually, well, this is the problem with Karl Marx, is that he wanted to incite violence. So, as I say, I'm just touching on it briefly, but he carried on those ideas of somehow this idea of God is just a human conception. There's no basis in reality. And the real oppressor is an economic imbalance, and being on the negative side of that imbalance, we need a drug to make us live in a fairy tale land to feel better about ourselves. The next character I just wanted to mention is Friedrich Nietzsche. And of course, many of us will know him. He's a bit later, so he died in 1900. And he believed that, he famously said, God is dead and we have killed him. And therefore, he said that there is no... Because God, for religious people, is the objective yardstick for determining our morality, what is right and what is wrong. So if we've killed God, then there's no objective reality for anything. And Friedrich Nietzsche said that means that everything is just meaningless. There's just nothing that's of any meaning in life. Nihilism. And he said if we are to find meaning, we need to exert our will to power. So we need to exert what we want to achieve and stuff like that onto, the system around us. We need to assert our will to power because it's the only thing that matters. And then the next character who again learned from Nietzsche, learned from many others, was JeanPaul Sartre. And I would say JeanPaul Sartre's ideas are, you can see, it's amazing how much he's affected modern thinking. But JeanPaul Sartre did not like the idea of God because he said that, well, if God exists, then I cannot be free. God is an inhibitor of my freedom. But I am free. Therefore, God does not exist. So, again, like Karl Marx and Feuerbach and Nietzsche, he recognized that there was this vacuum effect created. So once you've removed God, you've displaced God as being this objective reality. Well, God needs to be replaced by something, which is what the new atheists don't really do. They just say, God ruins your life, therefore don't worry because God does not exist. But JeanPaul Sartre tried to deal with that desire within ourselves for God. And he said what we need to do is to exert our individuality onto reality. So he said that because God is not there, the only thing that matters is what I think, what I believe, what I want, what I think is right, what I think is wrong. That's the only thing that matters. So he was saying that my sense of individuality is more important than anything else. This is the fundamental existentialist idea. So basically, I need to project my own sense of self onto the world around me. So it's almost where God has been displaced by these thinkers, and the individuality has been replaced in that same thing. I hope I'm making sense here. And then the final guy that I just wanted to talk about very briefly, as I say, I'm only touching on these people. Entire books have been written on these characters, and they indeed themselves wrote many books. The last guy is someone called Michel Foucault, and he died in 1984. And he perhaps was one of the most influential thinkers who've helped people think the way they do today. His biggest idea was this kind of like an archaeology of knowledge. So any given subject, you can any particular topic, and he would say, well, what does society believe is right and wrong about that in any given age? And he says, well, if society thinks one thing about a particular subject, what did they think 50 years ago? And then what did they think 350 years ago? And his argument was that although it's the same topic, whatever it might be, say for example violence, he will say in every given age there will be a particular way of looking at it. There will be particular things that were acceptable. And you can see how much of what he's saying is actually very factual and true. And he said, therefore, there is no kind of objective, you can see how they all learn from each other, objective moral compass for things. There's nothing that is, like a thermostat telling you definitely what temperature it is. And so therefore, again, learning from the others, we need to exert our own individuality onto a situation. For him, everything was just a function of power. So he believed that in any given age, the people who exerted their power were able to influence language, influence the arts, influence history, to affect, to change, to... all of this was done so that they can stay in power. And so everything, like Friedrich Nietzsche said, is a will to power. So for these thinkers, they've displaced God. We don't want God because he inhibits our sense of freedom. I cannot be free if God is there. I cannot be truly free without God being with God being there. Okay, they took it seriously and replaced that void, that gap, with the sense of the individual. And you can see it today in how so many people think and behave. It's very much a sense of my own individual importance over that of others. You see it in just simple things like the impatience of people. I mean, I'm so impatient, particularly with driving. But where does that come from? If it's not the sense that my journey is more important than someone else's. People are getting in my way. And it's just right through our society, because these thinkers wrote books and influenced teachers in schools and universities. These people influenced writers, novelists, artists, and these ideas have sort of trickled down and has become the mindset of so many people today. So that was a very long, roundabout way of trying to understand how and why we sort of think in the way that we do. And of course, the advancements of scientific knowledge have been the most amazing and remarkable things, but have also contributed to the idea that for anything to be factual, for anything to have any kind of significance in our society, we must be able to scientifically prove it. Okay, so those are those ideas. So guys, that was me just in a very long and roundabout way just trying to point out that even the most heavyweight of atheists acknowledge that we have this innate need for God. And of course they're trying to say, that gap can be filled with a projection of ourself, our will to power. But fundamentally, even they acknowledge that there is this need for God within each and every single unique human person. So the next thing I was hoping to just share with you was the Christian perception of God. I want to argue that Christianity both points to and reveals a mystery. When we say that we believe in God, we're acknowledging that God is a mystery. And there are 4 distinct ways that Christians try to use to think of God. And so the first way is to say that God is totally transcendent. And what that means is that God is totally beyond space and time. God is beyond what it means to exist. God is beyond being. God is infinite. God is, as he is in himself, is totally unknowable. There is no way that we can comprehend of God. And just an example, let's not take this example too far, but if we just think of the sun, and if we try to look at the sun, directly. We know that for prolonged periods of time that will damage our eyesight, it will damage our eyes, it may lead us to eventually go blind. As human beings, we fundamentally cannot directly look at the sun because it's just too much for us. But we can experience the sun through light, through heat, through the creation of shadow. We know that the sun is there, but we can't look directly at it. And I think that's a good example to try and explain this idea of transcendence. It's trying to stare directly into the sun, and fundamentally we can't do it. So Christians believe that God as he is in himself, there are no words to describe God, because if ever we try to label God with something, it limits God. So if I was to say God is a big thing, that means that God cannot be small. So every time we try to describe God, we put a limit on him, and fundamentally God is without limits. So this is this mystery that Christians are always pointing to. God is not a being among many other beings. God is not this supernatural thing, this being that is I don't know, somewhere. God is beyond all that, beyond all existence, beyond all knowledge, beyond all understanding. There is nothing that we can say of God that would ultimately define him. So Richard Dawkins attempts to say God is a supernatural being with the attributes of being all-loving, all-knowing. Okay, what we're doing there is basically creating some kind of superhuman, because knowing and loving and being and changing, these are all human attributes that we're just saying are super, just more elevated, and that must be what God is. Fundamentally, Christianity does not believe that God is a super being among other beings. So this throws into question that idea of the word existence. Science, empirical method, determines what can be sense experienced. And therefore, the word existence, in the way that we understand it, in the way that I can, I can know that this table exists because, I can touch it. If I hit my foot against it, I'll hurt my foot, All of these things have what we call contingent existence. They have the possibility of not being. They have finite existence. They can be something else. This is fundamentally what science tries to do, is to determine things through our sense experience. God fundamentally does not have contingent existence. So God does not exist in the way that we exist, the way things exist. And God cannot be empirically measured in the way that I can measure the depth of water, how solid something is. God's existence is not an existence that we can comprehend. So, as I say, Christianity is always pointing to a mystery. The second thing that Christians believe about God is that he is everywhere present and fills all things. We believe that God is present everywhere, but completely hidden. So a good way of thinking about it is that sun analogy again. So we can't stare directly at the sun, but we can feel its warmth. We can see because of its light. And that's very much a way of understanding God being present with us. God's energy, his uncreated energy, is constantly at work within the universe, bringing about good. Christians believe that every single good thought, good action, every single good thing that is done is ultimately inspired by the source of all goodness that Christians believe is God, though completely hidden. So God as he is in himself is just totally unknowable. We use that word transcendent. It's just, someone once said to me, the only thing we can say of God is that he is infinite. But again, that's a negative statement. You're saying he's not finite. There's nothing that can be definitely said of God to describe as he is in himself. except to say that he's everywhere present and fills all things. And that's what Christians believe. It's not so much that God is, in the creation around us. That's fundamentally not what Christianity believes, that somehow God is the tree, God is the flower. No, these things are created out of God's love. That's what Christians believe. Christians also think of God as being, as I said, this mystery. So the Holy Trinity. Christians believe in one God, but that one God is in three persons: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. These are paradoxes and confusing things that Christians point to, because fundamentally we can't explain anything about God. He's totally beyond us. And so what we do say about God, we believe, has been revealed to us in the person of Jesus Christ. Fundamentally, for Christians, everything comes down to Jesus. And what is it that, Jesus reveals? Well, in my experience, in my reading of the Gospels, in the Bible, I believe that the goodness, the life, and the love of God are revealed in something that Christians will celebrate quite soon, over that Easter weekend, on Good Friday, on Easter Sunday, in that cross and in the resurrection to new life. Fundamentally, Christians believe is the revelation of who God is. So despite being transcendent, hidden from us, totally beyond our language and our ability to understand, through Jesus' actions of laying down his life on the cross for the life of the world, and by rising to new life again, death is destroyed. And every single human person, no matter who we are, where we come from, has an opportunity to share in that new life. That is the fundamental Christian belief, the resurrection. And the resurrection, is what Jesus reveals God to be. For me, I think every single human being has an innate, natural desire to know and love that God that loves us so much, who is prepared to take on our human nature, to suffer and to die in the most excruciating way, to destroy death, and to offer us a way out. I believe humanity has that need for God, and I know that my reason will never comprehend God, because God is beyond my reason. And I know that science can never be in any kind of contradiction to that innate sense of feeling. Science is there to ask the question how things are. How does that happen? But not why. And I think that is fundamentally why I am still a Christian, because I don't believe that there is any kind of contradiction with reason, with science, and my faith. So, guys, I hope you enjoyed that episode. That's the end of episode 3. As always, please let me know what you think by leaving a comment in the comment section below. If you want to know more about some of those 20th century Enlightenment philosophers, existentialist philosophers, check out the link in that description below. But as always, guys, if you're new around here and you're enjoying the content, please do hit that like button just down below. And yeah, if you want to stay up to date, then hit that subscribe button. I hope you all have a fantastic day, and please let me know what you think. Take care, everyone. Bye.